Ambassador Thomas stood alone in the middle of the huge round chamber. The room was cold, with tall walls that curved up to a glass dome. Through the dome, he could see 3 of the system's planets hanging in the black sky. This was the heart of galactic power, the council chamber. Around him, in a circle, sat the representatives of 17 alien species. Some looked almost human. Others were so strange that Thomas still had trouble looking at them without feeling dizzy. They all had one thing in common. They had been among the stars for thousands of years before humans had even learned to make fire. "The council has reached its decision," announced the head speaker, a tall blue-skinned being with 4 arms. His voice was translated into English by the small device in Thomas's ear. "Humanity has proven too unpredictable. Your species advances too quickly. You take too many risks. You do not follow the proper path of development." Thomas tried to keep his face calm, but inside, his heart was racing. 6 months of arguments, presentations, and pleas had led to this moment. "Humanity is hereby restricted to their home solar system," continued the head speaker. "No human ships may travel beyond the orbit of Mars. We will place sentinel platforms to enforce this rule. You may keep the technology you have, but you will receive no more knowledge from the council archives." Thomas stepped forward. "This is unfair. We have followed all your rules since first contact. We have shared our discoveries. We have traded fairly." A reptilian council member hissed. "Your people adapt council technology in ways that were not intended. You ask too many questions. You do not respect the proper order of progress." "That's called innovation," Thomas argued. "It's how humans have always survived." "And that is precisely the problem," said another council member, this one floating in a tank of greenish liquid. "Your kind sees rules as challenges to overcome rather than wisdom to follow. You would upset balances that have kept peace for 50,000 years." Thomas looked around the room, searching for any friendly faces, any sign of support. He found none. Even the representatives who had seemed sympathetic during the hearings now avoided his eyes. "The decision is final," said the head speaker. "You have 1 standard month to recall all human ships and citizens to your solar system. After that, any human vessel found beyond Mars will be destroyed." Back on Earth, 3 days later, Thomas walked into the United Earth Government's emergency meeting. Leaders from all nations had gathered to hear the council's decision. When Thomas told them, the room erupted in anger. "They can't cage us in our own system," shouted one official. "We've barely begun to explore," said another. "What about our mining operations in the asteroid belt?" asked a third. President Wilson, a woman with gray hair and calm eyes, raised her hand for silence. When the room quieted, she turned to Thomas. "Is there any chance they will reconsider?" Thomas shook his head. "None. They see us as children playing with dangerous tools." Wilson nodded slowly. Then she stood and walked to the main screen that showed a view of Earth from orbit, blue, green, and beautiful. "For thousands of years," she said, "humans looked up at the stars and dreamed. For the last 100 years, we've been reaching for those stars. The council thinks they have ended our journey." She turned to face the room. "But they have not ended our journey among the stars. They have merely challenged us to find our own path." Her words were broadcast to every corner of Earth and to every human outpost in the solar system. As Thomas watched the determined faces around him, he realized something important. The council had not crushed humanity's spirit. In fact, they might have just awakened it. The banishment had begun. But so had humanity's response. 5 years passed after the council's judgment. On the surface, Earth seemed to accept its fate. The official reports sent to council observers showed humans focusing on their own planet and nearby space. But deep below the old research base in Antarctica, something else was happening. Dr. Lisa Barnes wiped sweat from her forehead as she studied the strange device on her workbench. The lad was hidden under 2 kilometers of ice. Here, shielded from the council's watching eyes, she led Project Pathfinder. "Try it again," she told her team. Increase the power by 5%. The device hummed, and then glowed with a soft blue light. It was a piece of alien technology they had bought from traders before the banishment. No one knew exactly what it did, but Lisa was determined to find out. "It's working," shouted one of her assistants. "The energy signature is stable." Lisa smiled. This was the breakthrough they needed. After years of reverse engineering alien tech, they were starting to understand how it worked. More importantly, they were learning how to improve it. Far away, in a small ship hiding in Saturn's rings, Commander Jack Reed watched the Council's Sentinel platforms through special sensors. His ship, the Shadow, was officially a mining support vessel. In reality, it was mapping the patterns and blind spots in the Council's blockade. "There it is again," said his co-pilot. "Every 43 minutes, that section of the network has a 3-second delay in its scan pattern." Reed nodded and marked it on his chart. "That's the 5th weakness we found. It's not much, but it might be enough." Reed's team had been testing the limits of the blockade for years. They never crossed the line, never gave the Council a reason to punish Earth. They just watched and learned. Meanwhile, in a busy spaceport at the edge of Council space, an alien named Koro nervously checked over his shoulder. He was risking everything by meeting with his human contact. Koro's species looked something like tall, thin otters with 6 eyes. The Council valued them for their technical skills, but Koro had developed a dangerous interest in human culture. "I brought what you asked for," he whispered, sliding a small data crystal across the table. "Technical specifications for the newest Council ships." His human contact, a woman posing as a trader, passed him a small package. Shakespeare's complete works and recordings of Earth's classical music, as promised. Koro's eyes blinked in excitement. To his people, human art was dangerously emotional, almost addictive. But to Koro, it was worth the risk. 3 months later, Lisa's team made their biggest discovery yet. Using Koro's smuggled data and their own research, they developed a new kind of drive system that could mask a ship's energy signature. In theory, Lisa explained to President Wilson in a secure meeting room, this stealth drive will make a ship invisible to the Council's sentinels. Wilson looked at the plans. "In theory isn't good enough. We need to test it." "That's where I come in," said Commander Reed, who had been called back from Saturn for this meeting. "My team will take a small ship through the blockade. If it works, we'll return with proof that we can bypass their cage." 2 weeks later, Reed sat in the cockpit of a small ship named Pathfinder. It had been specially built with the new stealth technology. "Approaching Mars orbit," he reported. "Stealth systems engage." Everyone watching from Earth held their breath. If the Council detected him crossing the forbidden line, they might punish all of humanity. The ship passed Mars. Then it went further. No alarms sounded. No Sentinel platforms turned to track him. The stealth drive was working. 6 hours later, Reed's ship returned to Earth orbit, having gone well beyond the blockade and back. As he stepped off the ship, he was met by Lisa, Wilson, and a small group of officials. "It worked," he said simply. President Wilson nodded. "Then it's time for the next phase. Project Exodus begins now." Humanity had taken its first secret step back to the stars. The colony ship Defiance was the largest spacecraft humans had ever built. It was assembled in secret, piece by piece, in a hidden shipyard orbiting Jupiter. Now it carried 5,000 carefully selected colonists toward a new home, a planet in the Ta-Ceti system, well beyond Council space. Engineer Mark Foster stood at a viewport, watching the stars streak by. The ship's stealth drive had successfully taken them past the Council's blockade. Now they were using a modified faster-than-light drive to cross the 20 light-years to their destination. "Enjoying the view?" asked a woman's voice behind him. Mark turned to see Anna Rice, the colony's head biologist. Her dark hair was tied back, and she carried a tablet filled with data on the planet they were heading to. "Just thinking about what we're doing," Mark replied. "No human has ever gone this far from Earth." Anna nodded. And if we succeed, we'll be making history. The first human colony outside our solar system. Neither said what they were both thinking. If they failed, no one on Earth would ever know what happened to them. 3 weeks later, the Defiance entered orbit around their target planet. They had named it Haven, a place of safety for humanity's future. From space, it looked like Earth, with blue oceans and green continents. Initial scans show breathable atmosphere, reported the science officer. Temperature ranges are within human comfort levels. Gravity is 1.1 times Earth normal. Mark and Anna were part of the first team to land on the surface. Their shuttle touched down in a grassy plain surrounded by forest. The sky above them was a deeper blue than Earth's, and the sun was slightly smaller and more orange. "It's beautiful," Anna said as she stepped onto the soil of their new home. The team began setting up monitoring equipment to check for any dangers they might have missed from orbit. Anna collected plant and soil samples, while Mark started mapping the area for the first settlement. 3 days into their survey, Anna made a startling discovery. While testing a water sample from a nearby lake, she found microscopic life forms that didn't match any expected patterns. "These aren't just simple bacteria," she told Mark that evening. "They show signs of being part of a complex ecosystem. I think we need to do more tests before we start building." Mark agreed, and they sent a diving team into the deeper parts of the lake the next day. What they found changed everything. "There's a structure down there," the lead diver reported, showing them underwater footage. "And it wasn't built by nature." The images showed what looked like buildings made of a coral-like material, and moving among them were creatures about the size of dolphins, but with 6 limbs and skin that changed colors as they swam. "They're intelligent," Anna said, watching the footage with wide eyes. "This planet isn't uninhabited after all." An emergency meeting was called among the colony leaders. Some argued they should find another planet, but most pointed out they had no guarantee any other world would be truly empty. "We came here for a fresh start," Mark said during the heated discussion. "Let's not begin by repeating humanity's worst mistakes. We don't need to conquer or displace these beings." Anna supported his view. "There's a large continent on the other side of the planet with no sign of their settlements. We can build there and establish a non-interference policy." In the end, that's what they decided to do. The human colony was established far from the underwater civilization, with strict rules about contact and observation. Meanwhile, back on Earth, President Wilson faced increasing pressure from Council observers. They were growing suspicious about certain resources going missing and unusual energy signatures being detected in the outer solar system. "I assure you," Wilson told the Council representative, "we are fully complying with the terms of our restriction." It wasn't exactly a lie. Earth itself was following the rules. But far away, on a planet the Council didn't know humans had reached, the future of humanity was taking root. A hidden colony that would soon become the cornerstone of a new human empire. 10 years had passed since humans first landed on Haven. What began as a small settlement of prefabricated buildings had grown into a thriving city with a population of nearly 50,000. More ships had secretly made the journey from Earth, bringing new colonists and supplies. In a large research complex on the edge of the city, Dr. Daniel Wright stared at the holographic model floating above his workbench. At 42, he had spent the last decade combining human innovation with the alien technology they had managed to smuggle or reverse engineer. "Run the simulation again," he told his computer. "Increase power to the containment field by 12%. The model changed, showing a sphere of energy forming, and then creating what looked like a hole in space itself. "Simulation successful," the computer reported. "Theoretical stable passage achieved." Daniel sat back in his chair, hardly believing what he was seeing. If his calculations were correct, he had just solved the greatest problem in space travel: how to move instantly between 2 points without using the established hyperspace corridors that the Council controlled. "Dr. Wright." His assistant stood in the doorway. "The director wants to see you. She says it's urgent." In the director's office, Daniel found not only his boss but also Mark Foster, now the colony's chief engineer, and Anna Reyes, who had become the head of human-native relations after her work establishing peaceful observation of Haven's underwater civilization. "The council knows something is happening," the director said without preamble. "They've sent an investigative fleet to Earth's solar system. They're demanding to inspect Jupiter's moons where we built the first ships." "Will they find anything?" Daniel asked. Mark shook his head. "We dismantled those facilities years ago, but they're getting suspicious. If they start scanning for our specific engine signatures in nearby star systems, then we need to move faster," Daniel said. He activated his tablet and showed them his latest work. "I think I've developed something that will change everything." He explained his breakthrough, a drive system that could create temporary wormholes in space. Unlike the Council's hyperspace technology, which required pre-existing corridors maintained by ancient navigation beacons, this fold drive could jump to any location that had been properly mapped. "Instead of traveling through space," he explained, "we fold space itself, bringing our destination to us." Anna looked impressed. "How much faster is it than Council ships?" "It's not about speed," Daniel said. "It's about freedom. Council ships can only travel along their established routes, like highways. This lets us go anywhere, instantly. No routes to monitor, no way to track where we've gone." 3 months later, the first ship equipped with the fold drive, named Quantum, prepared for its test flight. Daniel stood in the control room with Mark and the colony's leadership. "All systems ready," reported the ship's captain. "Fold coordinates locked on the Epsilon Eridani system." That star was 15 light-years away. With Council technology, the journey would take weeks. With the fold drive, it should take seconds. "Activate fold drive," ordered the colony director. On the main screen, they watched as the Quantum seemed to stretch for a moment. Then a flash of light surrounded it, and the ship vanished. The control room was silent. No one even breathed. Exactly 10 minutes later, the planned waiting time at the destination, another flash appeared, and the Quantum returned to Haven's orbit. "Fold drive test successful," came the captain's voice, slightly stunned. We were there, 15 light-years away, and then we came back. Just like that." A cheer erupted in the control room. Daniel felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Mark smiling at him. "This changes everything," Mark said. "With this technology, we can build a network of colonies faster than the Council can track us." On the main communication screen, an urgent message appeared from Earth. The Council investigative fleet had arrived and was demanding answers. But for the first time in 10 years, the human leaders weren't worried. Their future no longer depended on hiding. With the fold drive, humanity had just leaped beyond the Council's reach. With the fold drive, human expansion changed from a slow trickle to a flood. Over the next 5 years, colony ships jumped beyond Council space, establishing settlements on carefully selected planets. Each world was chosen to avoid detection. Star systems the Council considered unimportant or had never fully explored. Admiral Jack Reed, now in his 50s with gray streaking his once dark hair, stood on the bridge of the Freedom, humanity's first true warship. It was larger than anything humans had built before, with weapons and shields based on modified Council technology, but improved by human innovation. "Status report on the Wolf 359 colony," he asked his communications officer. "Population reached 10,000 last month, Admiral. Mining operations are at full capacity." Reed nodded with satisfaction. Wolf 359 was the 7th colony in what was now called the Human Federation, a loose alliance of settlements united by their determination to survive beyond the Council's reach. On the resource-rich mining world of Forge, industrialist Robert Kane walked through his massive shipyard. Unlike the Council's methodical, centuries-old production methods, Kane had developed fast, flexible manufacturing techniques that could build a starship in months rather than years. "The Council takes forever to build ships because they see no reason to hurry," Kane explained to a group of new engineers. We don't have that luxury. Speed is our advantage. In one section of the shipyard, workers were assembling a cargo vessel. In another, a new warship was taking shape. By next year, we'll be producing 10 ships for every one the Council builds, Kane said proudly. They've had thousands of years to perfect their methods. We've had to innovate or die. Back on Haven, now considered the unofficial capital of the Human Federation, Anna Rice prepared for a historic meeting. After years of careful observation and limited contact, she would lead the first official diplomatic mission to the underwater cities of Haven's native species, whom humans had named the HFY. Remember, she told her team, we're not going as conquerors or even teachers. We're going as equals seeking friendship. Their submersible vessel descended into the deep waters of Haven's largest ocean. As they approached the main HFY city, lights and patterns of welcome flickered across the coral-like structures. The HFY had their own language of color and movement, which Anna's team had spent years learning. The meeting went better than anyone had hoped. The HFY were naturally curious and had been observing humans just as humans had been watching them. They had advanced water-based technology, but had never considered traveling to the stars. When Anna's team returned to the surface, they carried with them a formal alliance, humanity's first treaty with a non-council species. Meanwhile, leaders from all human colonies gathered on Haven for the first Federation Council. Unlike the rigid Galactic Council, this human alliance emphasized flexibility and local control. Each colony must be able to govern itself. Admiral Reed argued during the discussions, if the Galactic Council ever finds one of our worlds, they can't be allowed to learn about all of them. The delegates agreed to a decentralized structure with Haven serving as a coordination point rather than a ruling center. Knowledge, technology, and resources would be shared freely between colonies. As the meeting concluded, an urgent message arrived from Earth. The Council's investigation had expanded. They had detected unusual energy signatures near several star systems outside their normal patrol routes. They're getting closer, Reed said grimly. They haven't found us yet, but they're starting to look in the right places. The Federation leaders knew it was only a matter of time before the Council discovered the truth. Humanity hadn't just escaped their solar system. They had built a network of 17 thriving worlds, developed technology that matched or exceeded the Council's in several areas, and established relations with a non-Council species. When they find us, said Robert Kane, they'll expect to find a handful of rebellious humans hiding on some backwater planet. Instead, Anna Reyes added, they'll find a federation of worlds ready to stand as equals. The humans had done more than escape their prison. They had built something new, something that would soon force the galaxy to recognize them. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was in chaos. Representatives of the 17 elder species shouted over each other as images of human colonies floated in the air above them. This is impossible, bellowed the reptilian delegate. How could they have spread so far? They were supposed to be contained in their home system, said another. The head speaker pounded his staff on the floor, calling for order. When the noise finally died down, he turned to the intelligence director, a thin being with pale skin. How many human settlements have we confirmed? He asked. At least 12, replied the director. But our scans suggest there may be more. They appear to be using some form of travel technology we are unfamiliar with. The silence that followed was heavy with shock. No species had developed a new form of faster-than-light travel in over 10,000 years. All civilizations used the Council's established hyperspace corridors. This cannot be allowed to continue, said the head speaker finally. Humans have violated our judgment. They must be brought back under control before they destabilize the entire galactic order. The Council voted unanimously to declare the Human Federation a rogue civilization and authorized military action against them. A fleet of 500 warships, the largest assembled in 5,000 years, was dispatched to the human colony that intelligence suggested was their main base, the planet called Haven. Admiral Reed received the warning from Earth's secret contacts among the Council races. They had less than 2 weeks before the Council fleet would arrive at Haven. "We need to evacuate the civilians," said Anna Reyes during the emergency meeting of Haven's leadership. "There's no time to move everyone," Reed replied grimly. "And if we abandon Haven, the Council will just keep hunting us. We need to make a stand here." Reed had prepared for this day. The Freedom and 30 other warships formed a defensive line around Haven. They were outnumbered more than 10 to 1, but they had advantages the Council didn't know about. When the Council fleet arrived, jumping in from hyperspace in perfect formation, they found what appeared to be a small, disorganized group of human ships. "This is High Commander Vex of the Galactic Council," came the transmission. "Your species has violated the terms of your containment. Surrender your colonies and technology immediately, or we will be forced to take action." Reed stood on the bridge of the Freedom, his face calm. "This is Admiral Jack Reed of the Human Federation. We reject your authority over free humans living outside your space. We have not interfered with any Council world or species. Leave us in peace." The Council fleet began to advance. Their ships were larger and more powerful than the human vessels. By all traditional measurements, the humans didn't stand a chance. But Reed had no intention of fighting a traditional battle. "Execute Jump Pattern Alpha," he ordered. The human ships activated their fold drives. In an instant, they vanished from their defensive line and reappeared at different points all around the Council fleet. Before the Council commanders could react, the human ships fired precision strikes at key vessels and then jumped away again. The Council fleet tried to reorganize, but the human ships kept appearing, striking, and vanishing before they could be targeted. It was warfare unlike anything the Council had seen in millennia. Meanwhile, beneath the oceans of Haven, the HFY observed the battle through their advanced sensing technology. Anna Reyes had asked for their help, and they had agreed. Now they sent vital information about local space conditions, gravitational eddies, and radiation pockets that human sensors couldn't detect. "New jump coordinates received," reported Reed's tactical officer. "The HFY say there's a gravity well forming at these coordinates." Reed smiled. "Direct all ships to drive the Council fleet toward that position." The human vessels coordinated their attacks, herding the increasingly confused Council ships toward what seemed like empty space. When 2/3 of the Council fleet had been maneuvered into position, Reed gave the final order. "All ships, maximum jump distance." Now, the human fleet vanished. Moments later, the gravity well collapsed, creating a massive shockwave that disabled nearly 300 Council ships. When the human fleet returned, they found the once mighty Council armada in disarray. For the first time in 5,000 years, the Galactic Council faced military defeat. "Send to all Council vessels," Reed ordered. "You have been defeated. Withdraw from Human Federation space or face destruction." The Council fleet retreated, leaving behind their damaged ships. The Battle of Haven was over. Humanity had won. News of the Council's defeat at Haven spread quickly across the galaxy. For thousands of years, the 17 elder species had maintained complete control over interstellar travel, trade, and diplomacy. Now, a species they had tried to cage in its own solar system had not only escaped, but had beaten their greatest fleet. 3 months after the Battle of Haven, representatives from 4 younger species arrived at the human colony. Like humanity, these races had been restricted by Council rules that limited their development and expansion. "We watched what happened," said the delegate from a race of tall, golden-skinned beings. "You did what none of us dared to do. You defied them and won." President Emma Clark welcomed them to Haven. Unlike her predecessors who had led Earth during the early years of banishment, Clark had been born on Haven. She had never known a life under Council restrictions. "The old ways are changing," she told the visitors. "The galaxy doesn't belong only to those who found the stars first." Even more surprising, ambassadors from 3 Council species arrived secretly on Haven. They represented the newest members of the Council, races that had been admitted within the last 1,000 years, but were still treated as junior partners with little real power. Many in the council are reconsidering their position on humanity. One of them admitted, "Your victory has forced even the oldest races to question their assumptions." Meanwhile, in her lab on Haven, Dr. Lisa Barnes worked on what would be her final project. Now in her 70s, she had devoted her life to breaking down the barriers between species. Her newest invention was a universal translator that could instantly convert any language, even the color-based communication of the HFY. The council kept species apart by making communication difficult. She explained to a group of young scientists. They controlled who could talk to whom. This device changes that forever. On Earth, the council's influence was fading. The blockade around the solar system had been lifted, not by choice, but because the council needed those ships elsewhere. Human vessels moved freely now, and Earth had officially joined the Human Federation. As preparations began for a historic summit on Haven, Admiral Reed and President Clark walked along the shore of the great ocean where the HFY lived. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Clark asked the old admiral, "when you were testing those first stealth ships against the blockade." Reed shook his head. "Never. I just wanted humans to be free to explore again. I never thought we'd end up remaking galactic politics." The summit began 2 weeks later in a massive hall built specially for the occasion. Representatives from 24 species gathered, 17 human colony worlds, the HFY, and 6 other non-council races. President Clark addressed them all. "We are not here to create a new council that rules over others. We are here to form an alliance of equals. Each species and each world will govern itself. We will share knowledge freely, trade fairly, and defend each other if needed." The principles of the new alliance were simple but revolutionary. No species would control another. Technology would be shared, not restricted. And new ideas would be welcomed, not feared. As the delegates signed what became known as the Haven Accords, a familiar figure watched from a seat in the back of the hall. Ambassador Thomas, now retired and in his 80s, had been invited as a special guest. He was the one who had stood alone in the council chamber decades ago and heard humanity's sentence of banishment. Anna Reyes noticed him and came to sit beside him. "What are you thinking, Ambassador?" she asked. Thomas smiled as he watched the delegates, human and alien, mingling freely. "I'm thinking about how the council's greatest mistake was not understanding humanity. They saw our unpredictability as dangerous. They never realized it was our greatest strength." As the ceremony concluded, news arrived that 7 more council species had requested to join the Haven Accords. The galaxy was changing faster than anyone had predicted. What had begun as punishment, the banishment of humanity from galactic society, had become the catalyst for a new era. Humans hadn't just survived their exile. They had used it to forge their own empire, and in doing so, had transformed the very civilization that had rejected them.